The iron bells rang at midnight, and Alara knew what they meant. She stood at the edge of the cobblestone courtyard, her worn cloak pulled tight against the autumn wind that swept through the fortress gates. The other servants had already scattered to their chambers, barring doors and windows, as they did every month when the moon swelled full in silver. But Alara had nowhere to go. She'd arrived only that morning, hired as a scullery maid after the steward took pity on her ragged state, a girl with no surname, no family, and burns crawling up both arms like serpents frozen in scar tissue. The bells rang again, deeper this time, reverberating through the stone walls of Shadowmere Keep. "You there?" a guard barked from the watchtower. "Get inside. Lock yourself in the kitchens if you must, but stay away from the eastern wing." Alara nodded, but her feet wouldn't move. She'd heard the whispers in the village before she'd climbed the mountain road to this place. They spoke of King Darren Ashenfell, the Lycan ruler who'd united the northern packs through blood and brutality. They spoke of the curse that turned him into something other than wolf, something that even his own kind feared. And they spoke of the chains, iron chains thick as a man's wrist, that bound him on nights like this. A howl split the air, raw and anguished, echoing from somewhere deep within the keep. Alara's breath caught. The sound wasn't entirely animal. There was something human in it, something that understood suffering in a way beasts never could. "Move, girl." The guard's voice was sharper now, edged with panic. She hurried toward the servants' entrance, her long sleeves catching on the rough stone as she passed through the narrow doorway. The corridor beyond was dimly lit by oil lamps that cast dancing shadows on walls hung with faded tapestries depicting ancient battles between Lycan clans. Another howl rang out, closer this time, followed by the grinding shriek of metal against stone. The head cook, a woman named Marta, with flour-dusted hands and worried eyes, grabbed Alara's arm as she entered the kitchens. "First day, and you're here for this? Poor child. Come, we'll wait it out together." "What happens to him?" Alara asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Marta's expression darkened. "The king transforms, as all Lycans do under the full moon. But his curse, it takes him deeper, makes him lose himself entirely. The beast that emerges knows only rage and hunger. That's why they chain him in the eastern tower, in a chamber built of stone and iron." She crossed herself, an old gesture from before the Lycan Wars. "Pray you never see him like that." But Alara found herself walking toward the sound rather than away from it. She couldn't explain the pull. The way her feet carried her through corridors, she didn't know. Past guards who'd abandoned their posts. The screams grew louder, human and animal tangled together, and beneath them, she heard the chains. They rattled and strained, links scraping against each other as something massive fought against their hold. She reached a heavy oak door reinforced with iron bands. It stood ajar, and through the gap, she could see stone steps spiraling upward into darkness. The sounds came from above, violent and desperate. Every instinct told her to run, but something stronger held her in place. It felt like invisible threads wrapped around her chest, pulling her forward with gentle insistence. Alara climbed the stairs. The chamber at the top was circular, its walls scarred with claw marks that gouged deep into the stone. In the center, surrounded by shattered furniture and pools of shadow, a creature stood bound by chains that ran from iron rings embedded in the floor and walls. It was massive, easily twice the size of any wolf she'd seen, with fur as black as winter nights and eyes that glowed with amber fire. But it wasn't entirely beast. The shape was wrong to tall, too broad through the shoulders, with hands that were half paw, half human, fingers tipped with claws. The transformation had caught between states, leaving something that belonged to neither world. Blood matted the fur where the chains had rubbed raw, and the creature's breathing came in ragged gasps that steamed in the cold air. Then those amber eyes found her. The beast went absolutely still. The rage that had filled the chamber moments before evaporated like morning mist, replaced by something Alara couldn't name. Recognition, perhaps, or confusion. The creature's massive head tilted to one side, and a low sound rumbled from its chest, not a growl, but something almost questioning. "You shouldn't be here," Alara breathed, then realized the absurdity of her words. This was his fortress, his kingdom. She was the intruder. The beast took a step toward her, chains pulling taut with a metallic shriek. It stopped immediately, as if aware of how the sound might frighten her. The amber eyes never left her face, studying her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. Then its gaze dropped, focusing on her sleeves, on the way she held her arms close to her body. Another step. Another stopped short when the chains caught. easy, Alara said softly, though she didn't know why she bothered. This thing couldn't understand her, could it? But the beast sat back on its haunches, still watching her, and the rage that had filled its form seemed to drain away entirely. Its breathing slowed. The wild thrashing ceased. And Alara realized with a shock that the creature was calming simply because she was there. She didn't move, barely dared to breathe, as they regarded each other across the scarred stone floor. Minutes passed. The moon tracked across the sky beyond the narrow windows. And slowly, impossibly, the beast began to change. Fur receded. Bones shifted with wet, terrible sounds. The massive form contracted, reshaping itself until a man knelt where the monster had been. He was still bound by chains, his body marked with the same bloody wounds. But he was human now, tall and powerfully built. With black hair that fell past his shoulders and a face that might have been carved from granite, King Darren Ashenfell raised his head. And his eyes, still that burning amber, met hers. "Who are you?" His voice was rough, scraped raw from screaming. "Alara," she managed. I was hired today. As a servant." He stared at her as if she'd spoken in a language he didn't know. Then his gaze dropped again to her sleeves, and something flickered across his face. Pain. Understanding. "You calmed me," he said, and it wasn't a question. The beast. It wanted to. He stopped, jaw tightening. "You shouldn't have come here. No one comes here during the full moon. It's not safe. You weren't going to hurt me. You can't know that." But Alara did know, with a certainty that made no sense. She'd felt no fear standing before the creature, only that strange pulling sensation, as if invisible threads connected them. Darren closed his eyes, and when he spoke again, his voice was barely audible. "Get out. Tell the guards to come at dawn. And stay away from the eastern wing." He looked at her one last time, and the expression on his face was one of such raw longing and despair that it stole her breath. "Please." Alara backed toward the door, unable to look away from him. Even bound and bleeding, even stripped of the beast's power, he commanded the space around him like a king born rather than made. But there was something broken in him too. Something that recognized the brokenness in her. She fled down the stairs and didn't stop running until she reached the kitchens, where Marta pulled her into a crushing embrace and demanded to know where she'd been. Alara couldn't answer, couldn't explain what she'd seen, or why her hands were shaking, or why her chest ached as if she'd left something vital behind in that tower chamber. Outside, the moon continued its arc across the sky, indifferent to the two souls it had just bound together. Morning came with gray light and cold rain that turned the fortress courtyard into a sea of mud. Alara woke on a straw pallet in the servants' quarters, her body stiff and her mind replaying the previous night in vivid detail. The amber eyes, the chains, the way the beast had calmed at the sight of her. She pushed the memories aside and dressed quickly, pulling on a clean servant's dress and making sure her sleeves covered every inch of scar tissue. The other maids were already moving through the halls, carrying water and linens, their conversations hushed. No one mentioned the king or what had happened during the night. It seemed to be an unspoken rule the curse existed. Everyone knew it, but speaking of it was forbidden. Alara's duties were simple enough: scrub the kitchen floors, help prepare meals, stay out of sight. The head steward, a severe man named Corvin, had made it clear during her brief interview that servants were to be invisible. The king's court was filled with Lycan nobles, warriors, and visiting alphas from other territories. They had no patience for human weakness. "Keep your head down and your mouth shut," Corvin had told her. "You're here because we're short-staffed, not because you're wanted." She'd nodded, grateful even for that small mercy. Shadowmere Keep was her last option. She had no family, no trade, and no prospects beyond the scars that marked her as damaged goods in any village she'd tried to settle in. The morning passed in a blur of steam and soap. Alara worked alongside 3 other human servants, none of whom seemed interested in conversation. They moved through their tasks with mechanical efficiency, their faces blank. It was only during the midday meal break that she learned why. "Don't get comfortable," one of them muttered, as they huddled in the corner of the kitchen with bowls of thin stew. Her name was Bess, and she had the worn look of someone who'd survived to many winters. "Human servants don't last long here. The king tolerates us, but the court," she shook her head, "they think we're beneath them." "Prey animals? Has anyone been hurt?" Alara asked. Bess's expression hardened. "Not physically. They're not allowed to touch us, king's orders. But there are other ways to make you feel small." She gestured to a bruise on her wrist. Reminders that we're here on sufferance. Alara glanced around the kitchen, noting the way the Lycan guards watched them with barely concealed disdain. Even Marta, kind as she'd been last night, kept her distance during daylight hours. Why do you stay? Alara asked. Where else would I go? Bess replied simply. It was an answer Alara understood all too well. That afternoon, she was assigned to clean the Great Hall, a cavernous space with vaulted ceilings and windows that let in streams of weak sunlight. The hall was empty except for a handful of guards and a man who stood near the throne examining a map spread across a wooden table. She recognized him immediately, the same height, the same broad shoulders, though his hair was now tied back, and his clothes were those of a king rather than a prisoner. Darren Ashenfell. Alara kept her head down and moved along the edges of the room with her bucket and brush, scrubbing at stones that didn't need cleaning. She could feel his presence like heat against her skin, that same invisible pulling sensation from the night before. It made her hands clumsy, and twice she nearly knocked over her bucket. You're new. His voice cut through the silence, deep and commanding. She froze. Protocol dictated that servants didn't speak unless spoken to, and even then, they kept their answers brief. Yes, Your Majesty, look at me. Slowly, Alara raised her head. Darren stood 10 paces away, his amber eyes fixed on her face with the same intensity she remembered from the tower. In daylight, he looked every inch the warrior king, tall and powerfully built, with a scar running from his temple to his jaw, and an air of controlled violence that made her pulse quicken. Do you make a habit of wandering into forbidden places? He asked. No, Your Majesty. Then why did you come to the tower last night? Alara hesitated. How could she explain something she didn't understand herself? I heard the chains, she said finally. I don't know what I thought. Something flickered in his expression, surprise, perhaps, that she would admit to not knowing. Most people, she suspected, would have lied to their king. You should have been terrified. I was, she said honestly. But not of you. The words hung between them, and for a long moment, neither moved. Then Darren turned back to his map, dismissing her with the gesture. Finish your work, and stay out of the eastern wing. It was the same warning he'd given her last night, but this time, it felt different. Less like a command and more like a plea. Alara returned to her scrubbing, her heart pounding. She could still feel his gaze on her even after he'd looked away, as if he were tracking her movements with senses beyond sight. The sensation was unnerving and oddly comforting at the same time. She'd nearly finished cleaning when raised voices echoed from the corridor beyond. A moment later, 3 figures entered the hall, 2 men and a woman, all of them moving with the predatory grace that marked them as Lycans. They were dressed in fine clothes, with weapons at their hips, and the unmistakable air of nobility. Darren, the woman called out, her voice sharp. We need to discuss the Thornridge Treaty. Before she stopped mid-sentence, her eyes landing on Alara. Why is there a human in here? She's cleaning, Darren replied, without looking up from his map. She's listening. Then perhaps you should speak more quietly. Syra. The woman Syra strode across the hall until she stood directly in front of Alara. She was beautiful in the way predators were beautiful, all sharp angles and cold eyes. What's your name, girl? Alara. Alara what? Just Alara. Syra's lip curled. No family name, no pack. How perfectly pathetic. She glanced back at Darren. This is who you allow in your court. Nameless strays? Watch your tongue, Syra. Darren's voice hadn't changed in volume, but something in it made the air feel heavier. She's under my protection, as all servants are. Protection? Syra laughed, but the sound had no warmth. Since when do you protect humans? Since always. Would you like to test that policy? The threat was implicit and undeniable. Syra's expression tightened, but she stepped back. As you command, my king. The words were respectful, but the tone was anything but. Alara kept her eyes on the floor, her face burning. She wanted to disappear, to sink into the stones and never be seen again. But she forced herself to remain still, to show no weakness. People like Syra fed on fear, and Alara had learned long ago not to give them that satisfaction. When the nobles finally left, the hall felt larger and colder. Alara gathered her cleaning supplies with shaking hands, desperate to escape before the king could say anything else. But as she reached the doorway, his voice stopped her. Alara. She turned, finding him watching her again with that unsettling intensity. Thank you, he said quietly, for last night, Before she could respond, he was gone, striding through a side door and leaving her alone with the echo of his words and the strange ache in her chest that refused to fade. 3 days passed before Alara saw the king again, though his presence haunted every corner of the keep. She heard his voice echoing through corridors, caught glimpses of him crossing the courtyard with his warriors, and felt the weight of his gaze when she worked in spaces he happened to occupy. Each time, that invisible pulling sensation grew stronger, until she found herself listening for his footsteps and unconsciously tracking his location, like her body had developed some new sense designed solely to find him. It was dangerous. She knew that instinctively. Whatever was happening between them, this strange awareness, this connection, it could only end badly. Kings didn't notice servants, not in any way that mattered. And even if they did, Alara was damaged goods. A girl with no name and nothing to offer, she kept her head down and her sleeves long, focusing on surviving each day. On the fourth morning, she was assigned to deliver fresh linens to the guest chambers in the western wing. The corridors there were wider and better maintained, with tapestries that hadn't faded and floors polished to a mirror shine. Visiting nobles occupied these rooms, alphas from allied packs, who'd come for some kind of summit Alara didn't fully understand. She was passing an open doorway when a hand shot out and grabbed her wrist. Well, the voice belonged to a man with silver-streaked hair and pale blue eyes that reminded her of winter ice. "What do we have here?" Alara tried to pull away, but his grip tightened, fingers pressing into the scars hidden beneath her sleeve. Pain flared, sharp and immediate, and she gasped, "Please, my lord, I'm just a servant." He pulled her closer, inhaling deeply. His eyes widened, and something predatory slid across his face. "But you smell interesting, not entirely human." He tilted his head, studying her like she was a puzzle to be solved. "There's something in your blood, something old. You're mistaken." Alara's voice came out steadier than she felt. "I'm nothing special. Let her go, Theron." The command came from behind them, cold and absolute. The man Theron released her wrist immediately and stepped back, his expression shifting to one of calculated respect. Darren stood in the corridor, flanked by the guards. He wasn't looking at Theron. His entire focus was locked on Alara, on the place where Theron had grabbed her. And the amber in his eyes had begun to glow with that same inhuman light from the tower chamber. "She wandered into my path," Theron said smoothly. "I was merely curious about get out of my sight. It wasn't a suggestion." Theron inclined his head and retreated into his chambers, closing the door with deliberate care. The guards melted away, leaving Alara alone with the king in a corridor that suddenly felt too small. "Are you hurt?" Darren's voice was rough, barely controlled. "No, your majesty. I'm fine. Don't lie to me." He closed the distance between them into strides and reached for her arm. Alara flinched back instinctively, clutching her sleeve, and something cracked in his expression. "I'm not going to hurt you. I know." And she did know, with that same inexplicable certainty. "But I'd prefer. I don't like people touching me." He nodded slowly, letting his hand fall. But his gaze remained fixed on her sleeve, on the way she held that arm protectively against her body. "What did he mean about your blood?" "Nothing. He was being strange. Theron is many things, but he doesn't speak without reason. He's one of the oldest alphas in the Northern Territories. If he sensed something in you." Darren trailed off, then seemed to reach a decision. "Come with me, your majesty. I have duties now, Alara." It wasn't a request. She followed him through winding corridors to a part of the keep she'd never seen before, a tower on the southern side with narrow stairs that climbed toward rooms reserved for the king's private use. Guards stood at attention as they passed, their expressions carefully blank. Darren led her to a study lined with books and maps, with windows that overlooked the mountains beyond Shadowmere. He closed the door and turned to face her, and for the first time since she'd arrived, Alara saw uncertainty in his features. "I need to ask you something. And I need you to answer honestly." He paused, as if choosing his words carefully. "Have you noticed anything unusual since you arrived here?" "Unusual? How?" "The way you calmed me during the full moon. The way I can sense you in the keep, even when I can't see you. The way my beast responds to your presence." He took a step closer, his voice dropping. "Tell me you feel it too. This pull between us." Alara's heart hammered against her ribs. She could lie, should lie. But something in his expression, raw and almost vulnerable, made honesty the only option. "I feel it," he exhaled, a sound caught between relief and anguish. Do you know what it means? No, it's a mate bond. The words fell like stones into still water. Among Lycans, there's a connection that forms between compatible souls. It's rare, and it's absolute. Once formed, it can't be broken. His amber eyes burned into hers. You're my mate, Alara. The study spun around her. Mate bond. The words made no sense. She was human, scarred, and worthless and nothing. Kings didn't bond with servants. Lycans didn't bond with humans. It was impossible. That can't be right, she whispered. There must be some mistake. There's no mistake. I've known since the moment you entered the tower chamber. The beast recognized you before I did. Darren's hands clenched at his sides, and she realized he was fighting for control. But Theron was right about your blood. A human wouldn't trigger a mate bond. There's something in your lineage, something you might not even know about. Alara thought of her earliest memories waking in a healer's cottage with no memory of her family, of the scars already covering her arms like brands. I don't know what I am. I've never known. Then we'll find out. He moved to a bookshelf and pulled down a leather-bound volume that looked ancient. There are records, bloodlines. If you carry Lycan heritage, even distant, it would explain. No, the word came out sharper than she intended. Alara backed toward the door, shaking her head. This is madness. I'm a servant. You're a king. Whatever you think you feel, it's not real. It can't be. Alara, I should go. My duties, damn your duties. The outburst surprised them both. Darren took a breath, visibly wrestling himself back under control. When he spoke again, his voice was gentler. Please, just listen. But Alara was already pulling open the door. She couldn't breathe in that room, couldn't think with him so close, and everything inside her screaming that he was right, that the bond was real, that she belonged with him in ways that defied logic and station. She ran, down the stairs, through corridors, past startled servants and guards. She didn't stop until she reached the kitchens, where she collapsed on a stool in the corner and tried to make sense of a world that had just shattered around her. Mate bond. Lycan heritage. None of it was possible. She was Alara the nameless, Alara the scarred, Alara who wasn't supposed to matter to anyone, but when she closed her eyes, she could still feel him. That invisible thread pulling taut between them, connecting her to a king who claimed she was his destiny. And the terrifying part was that some deep, buried part of her believed him. Alara avoided the king for the next week, which was easier said than done when every instinct urged her toward him. She volunteered for the worst duties, scrubbing the privies, hauling water from the well, working in the kitchens until her hands were raw. Anything to stay occupied, to keep her mind from circling back to that conversation in his study. Mate bond. The words haunted her. She'd asked Marta about Lycan mating customs during a quiet moment, trying to sound casual. The cook had given her a long look before answering. It's sacred to them, Marta had said. The bond chooses, not the Lycan. When it forms, they say it's like two souls recognizing each other across lifetimes. The pull is absolute, undeniable. She'd paused, kneading dough with flour-dusted hands. Why do you ask? Just curious. But Marta hadn't looked convinced. The keep was buzzing with activity and preparation for something called the Blood Moon Council, a gathering of alpha leaders from across the northern territories. Alara learned through servant gossip that the event happened once a year, timed to the autumn equinox and the rise of a particular full moon that turned the color of rust. It was part political summit, part ritual observance, and entirely dangerous for humans who might accidentally witness things they shouldn't. Stay in the servants' quarters during the ceremonies, Corvin warned them during the evening meal. The Lycans will be in heightened states. Their beasts closer to the surface. Some of them won't be in full control. Alara thought of Darren in the tower chamber, chains cutting into his flesh as he fought against transformation. Would all the alphas be like that? Or was his curse unique? She didn't want to care, tried not to care, but the bond pulled at her constantly now, a physical ache that intensified whenever he was near. She'd catch herself turning toward him before she even realized he'd entered a room. Her body attuned to his presence in ways that terrified her. On the night before the Blood Moon Council, Alara was in the great hall polishing silverware when Sire appeared. The female alpha moved with liquid grace, her eyes tracking Alara like a cat watching a mouse. Still here, little human? Sire's voice dripped with false sweetness. I thought you'd have run off by now. I have work to do, my lady. Work, Sire laughed. Is that what you call it? Lurking in corners where the king might notice you. Alara's hands stilled on the cloth. I don't know what you mean. Oh, I think you do. Cyrus circled closer, and Alara caught the scent of something wild and dangerous beneath her perfume. You've caught his attention somehow. I've seen the way he watches you, the way he reacts when you're near. Her voice dropped to a hiss. Whatever game you're playing, it ends now. I'm not playing any game. Liar. Cyrus' hand shot out, grabbing Alara's arm through her sleeve. Her fingers found the ridges of scar tissue and pressed down hard. You think a king would want something as broken as you? You think you could ever be more than a passing curiosity? Pain lanced up Alara's arm, but she refused to cry out. She'd learned long ago that showing weakness only invited more cruelty. Let go of me. Or what? You'll tell the king? Cyrus' laugh was cruel. He protects you out of duty, nothing more. Humans are beneath us. You're beneath us. And whatever delusion you've built up in your little servant's mind, release her, now. The temperature in the hall seemed to drop. Cyrus' hand fell away as if burned, and Alara stumbled back, cradling her arm. Darren stood in the doorway, and the fury radiating from him made the air shimmer. My king. Cyrus' tone shifted instantly, becoming placating. I was merely touching her. Each word was precise, clipped. After I explicitly forbade any member of my court from harming the servants. She's mine. The word came out as a growl. She's mine, Syra, and if you lay hands on her again, I will personally escort you and your entire pack from my territory. Am I clear? Cyrus' face went white. Perfectly clear, your majesty. Get out. The alpha fled, and suddenly the massive hall felt too small, too intimate. Alara forced herself to meet Darren's gaze and immediately regretted it. The amber of his eyes was glowing, and his control looked threadbare. Did she hurt you? His voice was rough and human. No, I'm fine. Show me. It wasn't a request. Slowly, Alara rolled up her sleeve, revealing the angry red marks where Cyrus' fingers had gripped her. But more than that, she revealed the scar's thick, ropey burns that covered her forearm like a grotesque sleeve. They were old, long-healed, but the tissue was raised and discolored, marking her as irrevocably damaged. Darren went utterly still. He stared at the scars with an expression Alara couldn't read: horror, perhaps, or pity. She waited for him to turn away in disgust, to realize that claiming her as his mate was a mistake. Instead, he knelt, the king of Shadowmere, ruler of the northern Lycan territories, knelt before a nameless servant, and reached out with trembling hands. May I? Alara nodded, not trusting her voice. His fingers traced the edge of one scar with infinite gentleness, following its path from wrist to elbow. His touch was warm, reverent, and where his skin met hers, something sparked a sensation like lightning contained beneath flesh. Who did this to you? The question came out barely above a whisper, but she heard the threat of violence coiled within it. I don't remember. The healer who found me said I was 6 years old, half dead from burns and exposure. No one ever came looking for me. Alara's throat tightened. I've always assumed my parents were the ones who know. Darren's grip tightened fractionally. No. These aren't punishment burns. Look at the pattern. The way they wrap around your arms. His amber eyes met hers, and they were filled with an emotion she couldn't name. These are ritual marks. Someone was trying to bind something in your blood. The words made no sense. Bind what? Power, magic. He rose, still holding her arm, and the bond between them pulsed with sudden intensity. The Lycans have an old practice, blood binding. It's used to suppress magical heritage, to lock away abilities that might be dangerous. If you were burned this way as a child, then someone was afraid of what I might become, Alara finished. The realization hitting her like a physical blow, or they were trying to protect you. Darren's jaw tightened. The rituals haven't been performed in generations. They're forbidden now. But if someone used them on you, they believed your power was significant enough to warrant it. Alara pulled her arm back, suddenly desperate for distance. The implications were too large, too impossible. I don't have power. I'm nobody. You calmed a cursed king during a blood moon transformation. You triggered a mate bond that shouldn't exist between human and Lycan. And you carry scars that suggest you were born with magic. Someone feared. Darren stepped closer, and she could feel the heat radiating from him. You are not nobody, Alara. You never were. She wanted to believe him. God. How she wanted to believe him. But years of being invisible, of being worthless, had taught her that hope was dangerous. The Blood Moon Council begins tomorrow, Darren continued, his voice gentler now. There will be alphas here who are older than me, who remember the old practices. One of them might recognize what was done to you. He hesitated, then reached up to cup her face with one large hand. Will you let me find answers? The touch sent sparks through her entire body. The bond surged between them, stronger than ever, and Alara realized she was leaning into his palm despite herself. Why does this matter to you? She whispered. I'm just a servant, because you're my mate. He said it simply, as if it explained everything. Because the moment you walked into that tower, my beast recognized you as ours. Because every instinct I have demands I protect you, claim you, keep you safe. His thumb brushed across her cheekbone. And because when I look at you, I see someone strong enough to survive what should have killed them. Someone brave enough to face a monster without flinching. You deserve to know who you really are. Alara closed her eyes, overwhelmed. She'd spent her entire life trying to be invisible, trying not to want things she couldn't have. But Darren was offering her something she'd never dared to imagine: a place, a purpose, an identity beyond nameless and scarred. Okay, she breathed. Find your answers. When she opened her eyes, his expression had transformed into something fierce and possessive. Thank you. He stepped back, putting distance between them, and Alara felt the loss of his warmth like a physical ache. The bond stretched taut, protesting the separation. Stay in your quarters tomorrow during the ceremonies, he said, his voice returning to the commanding tone of a king. The other alphas will be dangerous, and I won't risk your safety. When it's over, we'll talk. Then he was gone, leaving Alara alone in the great hall, with her scars exposed, and her world irrevocably changed. The blood moon rose like a wand in the sky, casting crimson light across Shadowmere Keep. Alara watched it from the narrow window of her sleeping quarters, her arms wrapped around herself as the distant sounds of the ceremony echoed through stone corridors. Howls rose and fell in complex patterns, not random, but rhythmic, like some ancient song she couldn't quite interpret. She should have been sleeping. All the servants had been ordered to their quarters hours ago, the doors barred from the outside for their protection, but Alara couldn't rest. Not with the bond pulling at her like a fishhook lodged in her chest. She could feel Darren somewhere in the keep. His presence, a beacon that made her skin prickle with awareness. Something was wrong. She felt it in the way the bond suddenly pulled taut, in the flash of pain and fury that echoed through the connection like a scream. Her hands flew to her chest, gasping at the intensity. He was in danger. She knew it with absolute certainty. The door to the servants' quarters was barred, but the window was just large enough. Alara squeezed through, dropping into the shadows of an empty courtyard. The crimson moonlight painted everything in shades of blood and rust. More howls erupted from the eastern wing, the great hall where the council was taking place. She ran. Guards should have stopped her, but the corridors were empty. Everyone was at the ceremony, leaving the keep feeling abandoned and surreal. Alara followed the bond like a compass needle pointing north, her feet carrying her toward Darren without conscious thought. The great hall doors stood open, and what she saw inside stopped her cold. The space had been transformed. Torches burned with strange blue flames, casting dancing shadows across walls hung with ancient banners depicting wolves and moons. In the center of the hall, a circle had been drawn in what looked like salt mixed with ash, and within that circle stood Darren. He was stripped to the waist, his muscular torso marked with symbols painted in dark ink. Chains hung from his wrists, not iron like in the tower, but silver that gleamed in the firelight. Blood ran from where the silver touched his skin, but he stood motionless, his amber eyes fixed on something across the circle. Darren, the silver-haired alpha who'd grabbed Alara in the corridor. He stood outside the circle, flanked by a dozen other Lycans Alara didn't recognize. They were all watching Darren with expressions ranging from curiosity to hunger. The curse makes you weak, Darren was saying, his voice carrying across the hall. Month after month, you lock yourself away like an animal. The Northern Territories deserve a king who can control his beast, not one who fears it. Careful, Darren. Darren's voice was steady despite the blood running down his arms. That sounds suspiciously like a challenge. It is a challenge. Darren smiled, and it was a predator's expression. Ancient law. During the Blood Moon Council, any alpha may invoke the right of dominance. Winner takes the throne. He gestured to the circle. I've activated the binding. You can't leave until the challenge is resolved. And with silver chains weakening you, he shrugged. This should be quick. Alara's heart hammered against her ribs. Silver burned Lycans, she'd heard the servants whisper about it. And Darren was already wounded, already constrained by whatever ritual had drawn that circle. She should run, should get help. But the bond pulsed with desperate urgency, and her feet carried her forward instead. Stop. Every head in the hall turned toward her. The Lycan's eyes glowed with reflected firelight, amber and silver and pale gold, dangerous, predatory, fixed on the human girl who'd just interrupted their sacred ceremony. Darren's expression transformed into something between fury and terror. Elara, get out of here, now. But Theron was already moving, crossing the space between them with inhuman speed. He grabbed her arm, the scarred one, and dragged her toward the circle. How convenient. The king's little pet arrives just in time to watch him fall. Let her go. Darren's voice had gone guttural, more animal than human. Or what? Theron tightened his grip, and Elara bit back a cry as his fingers pressed into her scars. You're bound by silver and salt. You can't reach me, can't save her. He inhaled deeply, and that same predatory interest from before crossed his face. I was right about her blood. There's power here, old magic locked away. Perhaps when I'm king, I'll keep her. Discover what she's hiding. I'll kill you. Darren snarled, and his body began to shift. Bones cracked. Muscles rippled. The transformation was coming, despite the silver, despite everything meant to contain it. Stop. Elara twisted in Theron's grip, desperate. Please. He'll hurt himself. The silver let him. Theron's smile widened. A king who can't control his beast is no king at all. But Elara was done being helpless. She'd spent her entire life accepting that she was powerless, damaged, nothing. But Darren had seen something different in her, something strong. And maybe, just maybe, he was right. She stopped fighting Theron's grip and instead leaned into it, letting her full weight drop. The unexpected move threw him off balance, and his fingers loosened just enough for her to wrench free. She scrambled across the floor toward the circle, toward Darren, driven by pure instinct. Don't break the salt. Someone shouted, but Elara's foot was already scattering the white line, disrupting the perfect circle. The blue flames guttered and died. The binding shattered like glass, and Darren lunged. He moved faster than thought, the silver chains snapping like thread as his body completed its transformation. The beast that emerged was the same one from the tower, massive and dark, caught between wolf and man. But this time, it wasn't mindless. This time, amber eyes blazed with cold intelligence. Theron barely had time to shift before Darren was on him. They collided in a blur of fur and fangs, crashing into tables and sending Lycans scattering. The hall erupted into chaos, some alphas shouting for guards, others forming a ring around the combatants as if this were entertainment. Elara pressed herself against the wall, her heart in her throat. The fight was brutal and swift. Darren's beast moved with deadly precision, using size and strength to overwhelm Theron's silver wolf form. They tumbled across the floor in a snarling mass until Darren's jaws closed around Theron's throat, not quite breaking skin. But the threat was unmistakable. The hall went silent. Yield. Darren's voice rumbled from the beast's throat, distorted but understandable. Or die. Theron went limp, exposing his throat in the ultimate gesture of submission. The fight was over. Slowly, Darren released him and stepped back. The transformation reversed itself with grinding, painful sounds until the king stood human once more, breathing hard and covered in blood, some his, some Theron's. The silver chains hung from his wrists in useless fragments. The challenge is answered, he said, addressing the gathered alphas. Any others wish to question my right to rule? Silence. Then, one by one, the Lycans lowered their heads in acknowledgement. Darren's gaze found Elara across the hall, and something in his expression made her chest ache. Relief, gratitude, possession. He crossed to her in 3 strides and pulled her against his chest. Heedless of the blood or the watching crowd, you broke the binding, he murmured against her hair. How did you know that would work? I didn't. She was shaking now, adrenaline and fear catching up to her. I just knew you needed me. I did. His arms tightened around her. I do. Someone cleared their throat. Elara turned to find an elderly female Lycan watching them with ancient, knowing eyes. She wore robes marked with phases of the moon and leaned on a staff carved with strange symbols. So, the woman said, her voice like dry leaves, the curse finally finds its answer. Darren's entire body tensed. Elder Morgana, I am old boy. Old enough to remember the binding rituals, old enough to recognize what was done to this child. She approached Elara, her gaze fixed on the exposed scars. May I? Elara nodded, too overwhelmed to speak. The elder's fingers traced the burn patterns with feather-light touches. Blood binding. performed when she was very young to lock away inherited magic. She looked up at Darren. Your mate carries moonblood healer magic from the first packs, before the split between Lycan and human. It's rare, dangerous, and someone tried very hard to ensure she never discovered what she was. Can it be undone? Darren asked. Perhaps. But the question is whether she wants it undone. Morgana turned back to Alara. The binding has kept you safe, child. Kept you hidden. To break it would mean embracing power you've never known, risks you can't imagine. But it would also mean becoming whole. Alara stared at her scarred arms, at the marks that had defined her entire life. She thought of all the years spent being invisible, worthless, nothing. And she thought of Darren's words. You are not nobody. You never were. What would I become? She whispered. Yourself. Morgana smiled, and it was surprisingly gentle. A healer. A bridge between worlds. The mate. A cursed king needs to break his own binding. The bond pulls between them, and Alara felt Darren's presence wrapping around her like a second heartbeat. He wasn't pushing, wasn't demanding, simply waiting for her choice. She took a breath and met the elder's ancient gaze. Tell me how. The ritual would take place at dawn, when the blood moon had set and the natural sun could burn away what had been bound in darkness. Alara spent the hours before sunrise in Darren's private chambers, neither of them sleeping. He'd dismissed the servants and the council, wanting only to be with her in what remained of the night. They sat together by the fire. Alara wrapped in a thick blanket while Darren tended to the wounds the silver chains had left on his wrists. The injuries were already healing and regeneration was swift, but she watched him work with careful attention anyway, learning the way his hands moved, the set of his jaw when he concentrated. Are you afraid? He asked quietly. Yes, there was no point lying. What if the binding breaks and there's nothing underneath? What if I'm still just empty? You've never been empty. He set aside the bandages and turned to face her fully. The magic doesn't make you who you are, Alara. Your strength does. Your courage. The way you ran into danger to save me, even though you knew it might cost your life. His hand found hers, threading their fingers together. The binding didn't create those things. It only hid what you already were. What if I can't control it? The power, I mean. Then I'll help you learn. His grip tightened. You're not alone in this anymore. You understand that, don't you? Whatever comes after dawn, you're mine and I'm yours. The bond doesn't break, ever. Alara leaned against his shoulder, letting his warmth seep into her bones. The bond hummed between them, content, and settled for the first time since it had formed. Tell me about your curse. The real story, not what the servants whisper. Darren was quiet for a long moment. My father was king before me, a good ruler, but he made enemies. One of them was a witch from the Eastern Covens, powerful and cruel. When he refused her suit, she cursed his bloodline. Any heir of his would suffer uncontrollable transformations during the full moon, becoming a beast that knew only rage. He stared into the fire, his expression distant. My father died trying to break the curse. My brother killed himself rather than live with it. I inherited the throne and the curse, both. And I've spent 10 years locked in chains, one night every month, praying I don't break free and slaughter everyone I'm supposed to protect. But you didn't break free. Not until I touched the salt circle. No, his amber eyes found hers, and they were filled with wonder. The witch's curse was meant to isolate us, to ensure no king could form proper bonds or alliances. But she couldn't have predicted a mate bond with someone carrying moonblood. Your magic calls to mine, Alara. It soothes the beast because you share its nature, wolf and human, power and restraint, all balanced in ways that shouldn't be possible. So if the binding breaks, the curse might break with it. He cupped her face with both hands, his touch infinitely gentle, despite the strength in those fingers. Or at minimum, I'll have a tether strong enough to hold me. Either way, you've already saved me. Alara closed her eyes, overwhelmed by the weight of his words. I don't know how to be what you need. You already are. He pressed his forehead to hers, and the bond flared bright between them. Just stay. That's all I ask. Stay and let me protect you the way you've protected me. They remained like that until the first gray light of dawn touched the windows, drawing comfort from each other's presence. When Elder Morgana's knock finally came, Alara felt steady despite the fear coiling in her stomach. The ritual took place in the castle's ancient chapel, a space carved directly from the mountain and open to the sky. Morgana had prepared a circle of stones marked with symbols that seemed to glow with inner light. Candles burned at each cardinal point, their flames dancing in the pre-dawn breeze. "Remove your sleeves," Morgana instructed, with shaking hands. Elara pulled off her dress, standing in only her shift, so that both arms were fully exposed. The scars looked worse in the candlelight, thick and ropey, covering her from wrist to shoulder in patterns that might have been beautiful if they weren't brands of pain. Darren stood just outside the circle, his presence a solid anchor. The bond stretched between them, and Elara drew strength from it as Morgana began to chant in a language that predated modern speech. The elder moved around the circle, painting new symbols over the old scars with what looked like liquid moonlight. Where the substance touched burned skin, it glowed first faint, then brighter, until Elara's arms were covered in luminescent script. The binding was done in fire and fear, Morgana intoned. "We break it with light and love." The moon witnessed what was locked away. "The moon will witness its release." The chanting grew louder, and other voices joined in, Lycans who'd gathered at the edges of the chapel, adding their power to the ritual. Elara felt heat building beneath her skin, not painful, but intense, as if something dormant was waking after years of forced sleep. "Elara," Morgana's voice cut through the chanting. "You must call it forth yourself. Reach for the power that was stolen from you. Claim it." She didn't know how, had never felt anything like magic before. But the bond pulsed with encouragement, with Darren's absolute faith in her, and she reached inward to the place where pain and memory tangled together. "I am more than this," she thought. "More than scars and silence. More than invisible." The light exploded outward. It felt like fire racing through her veins. But instead of burning, it healed. Elara screamed as power surged through channels that had been closed her entire life, breaking through the binding with force that threatened to tear her apart. The scars on her arms began to glow white hot, the tissue bubbling and reforming. "Hold on." Morgana's voice seemed to come from very far away. "The binding is breaking. Let it happen." But it hurt. God, it hurt worse than the original burns, worse than anything she'd ever experienced. Elara's knees buckled, and she would have fallen if strong arms hadn't caught her. Darren. He'd broken into the circle, pulling her against his chest, despite Morgana's shout of warning. "I've got you," he murmured against her hair. "Stay with me, Elara. Just breathe." The bond flared between them, and suddenly his strength was hers. The power that had been overwhelming found direction, flowing through the mate connection and settling into patterns that felt right, natural. Elara gasped as the pain receded, replaced by a sensation of wholeness she'd never known. When she finally opened her eyes, dawn had broken fully across the sky. The candlelight looked pale compared to the sun streaming through the chapel's open roof. And her arms, the scars were gone. Not entirely. Faint silver lines remained where the burns had been, marking her skin like delicate filigree. But the thick, ropey tissue had melted away, leaving behind something almost beautiful. And when she focused, she could feel power thrumming just beneath her skin, warm and ready. "You did it," Darren breathed. His arms were still around her, and she realized they were both kneeling in the center of the circle. "How do you feel?" "Different." Elara flexed her fingers, watching the silver lines catch the light. "Whole." Morgana approached, leaning heavily on her staff. "The moon blood is released. You carry healer magic now, child, the ability to mend wounds, ease pain, calm the beast within others." She glanced at Darren with knowing eyes. "And to break curses rooted in rage." Elara turned in Darren's arms, meeting his amber gaze. "Your curse? Test it," he said simply. "Tonight is still a full moon. If the curse holds, I'll transform at moonrise. But if you've truly broken it." He didn't finish, but she heard the hope buried in his voice, the desperate wish that he might finally be free. "I'll be there," Elara promised. "Whatever happens." His answering smile was fierce and possessive. Then he kissed her properly, deeply, claiming her mouth with an intensity that stole her breath and made the bond sing between them. When they finally broke apart, the gathered Lycans were watching with expressions ranging from approval to shock. Cyrus stood among them, her face twisted with fury. But she said nothing, simply turned and stalked from the chapel. Elara didn't care. For the first time in her life, she felt seen, real, powerful, and absolutely terrified of what came next. Word spread through Shadowmere Keep like wildfire. The human servant was the king's mate. By midday, Elara's status had transformed from invisible to scrutinized. Lycans, who'd never given her a second glance, now watched her with wary respect. The servants treated her with careful deference. as if unsure how to behave around someone who'd crossed the invisible line between their world and royalty. Alara hated it. She'd spent weeks learning to be unnoticed. And now she felt exposed every moment. Worse, she had no idea how to act. Was she still a servant? Should she continue her duties? No one seemed willing to tell her, so she defaulted to what she knew, returning to the kitchens to help prepare the midday meal. Marta took one look at her and burst out laughing. "Child, you can't be serious. I don't know what else to do. You're the king's mate." Marta gestured to the flour-dusted workspace. "You don't scrub pots anymore. You don't haul water. You certainly don't help with the cooking. Then what do I do?" The question hung in the air, unanswered. What did a mate do? Especially one who'd been revealed only hours ago, who still wore a servant's plain dress and had no idea how to navigate the complex politics of a Lycan court. Corvin appeared in the doorway, his severe expression unchanged despite the upheaval. "The king requests your presence in his study." Immediately, Alara followed him through corridors that felt different now that she walked them openly. Guards nodded to her as she passed. Nobles stepped aside with grudging acknowledgement. It was surreal and overwhelming in equal measure. Darren was bent over a map when she entered, but he straightened immediately, his entire focus shifting to her with that intensity she was beginning to recognize. The bond hummed contentedly at their proximity. "You went back to the kitchens." It wasn't a question. "I didn't know where else to go." "Here." He gestured to the space beside him. "You belong here, with me." Alara approached slowly, taking in the maps and documents scattered across his desk. "I don't understand any of this. Politics, territories, treaties, you'll learn." He pulled out a chair, waiting until she sat before taking the seat beside her. "Alara, I need to explain something about mate bonds among Lycans. They're not just romantic partnerships. A mate becomes equal in power and authority. You're not my consort or my subordinate. You're my partner in everything. But I'm not Lycan. You carry moonblood. You broke a curse. You calmed my beast when nothing else could." His hand found hers, threading their fingers together. "The bond doesn't care about bloodlines or status. It chose you because you're exactly who I need. Who the kingdom needs. The kingdom doesn't know me. Then they'll learn." He squeezed her hand gently. "I won't lie, this will be difficult. There are Lycans who believe humans are inferior, who will question your right to stand beside me. But I will not hide you or diminish you to make them comfortable. You're mine, and I protect what's mine." The words should have felt possessive, but instead, they wrapped around her like armor. Alara thought of Sire's cruelty, Theron's predatory interest, all the small humiliations she'd endured as a servant. Having someone claim her so absolutely felt like safety rather than confinement. "What about tonight?" she asked. "The full moon. We'll face it together." His amber eyes held hers. "If the curse breaks, I'll be free for the first time in a decade. If it doesn't," he trailed off, jaw tightening. "Then we'll know the moonblood wasn't enough. It will be enough." Alara didn't know where the certainty came from, but it filled her completely. "The bond is stronger now. I can feel it. So can I." He stood, drawing her up with him. "Come, there's something I want to show you." He led her through the keep to a tower she hadn't explored, higher than the eastern wing where he was usually chained, with stairs that spiraled upward until they emerged onto a rooftop garden. Alara gasped at the view. Mountains stretched in every direction, their peaks touched with early snow. The autumn forest below blazed with color, and she could see the winding road she'd traveled weeks ago when she'd first arrived. Desperate and alone, "This was my mother's favorite place," Darren said quietly. "She died when I was young, but I remember her bringing me here." She said the height gave perspective, made problems seem smaller. Alara turned to him, seeing vulnerability in his expression she hadn't expected. "You miss her, every day." He moved to the edge of the garden, where a stone bench overlooked the valley. "She would have liked you, would have understood what it meant that the bond chose a healer." He pulled something from his pocket, a silver ring set with a pale blue stone. "This was hers. I want you to have it, Darren." "I can't." "Yes, you can." He took her left hand, sliding the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, as if made for her. In Lycan tradition, mates exchange marks of commitment. "This is mine to you, a promise that I will stand beside you, protect you, and honor what we share." His thumb brushed across the ring. "When you're ready, you'll give me yours in return." Alara stared at the ring, at the way the stone caught the light. She'd never owned anything of value before, had certainly never expected to wear something that once belonged to a queen. "What if I mess this up? I don't know how to be whatever I'm supposed to be now. Neither do I. Darren pulled her close, wrapping his arms around her waist. I've been king for 10 years, and I still make mistakes. But we'll figure it out together. That's what mates do. She leaned into his embrace, letting his warmth and steady presence calm the anxiety churning in her stomach. The bond wrapped around them both, a living thing that pulsed with contentment whenever they were close. Tell me about the curse one more time, she said against his chest. Everything you know about how it works, he did, explaining the witch's magic. The way the transformation felt like being torn apart from the inside. The rage that consumed him until he couldn't remember his own name. Alara listened carefully, already reaching for her newly awakened power, trying to understand how it might help. The moonblood felt like liquid light in her veins, warm and responsive, eager to heal. She could sense Darren's presence through it now, could feel the curse like a dark knot lodged somewhere deep in his chest. It pulsed with malevolent energy, ancient and cruel. When you transform, she said slowly, does it feel like something is forcing you, or like something is being torn away? Both. The beast rises up, and the curse strips away everything human, leaving only rage. He pulled back to look at her. Why? Because healing isn't just about fixing wounds. It's about restoring balance. Alara placed her palm over his heart, feeling the steady beat beneath. Your beast isn't the problem. The curse is. It's twisting something natural into something violent. Understanding dawned in his eyes. You're going to try to heal the curse itself? Yes. If the moonblood can break bindings, it can break this too. She hoped she sounded more confident than she felt. But I need you to trust me. Even when the transformation starts. Even when you're afraid you might hurt me. I will always be afraid of hurting you. Then we'll be afraid together. She stood on her toes and kissed him, pouring every ounce of determination she possessed into the gesture. When they broke apart, his eyes glowed amber. Let's end this tonight. Sunset painted the sky in shades of purple and gold as Alara made her way to the eastern tower. She'd spent the afternoon preparing, speaking with Morgana about how to direct her healing magic, meditating to center herself, and trying not to think about all the ways this could go wrong. If she failed, Darren would remain cursed for another month, trapped in a cycle of violence and chains. If she succeeded, they would both be free. Marta had insisted on helping her dress in something more appropriate than a servant's uniform. The result was a simple gown in deep green, with sleeves that covered the silver trace scars but were loose enough not to restrict movement. The king's ring gleamed on her finger, and her dark hair had been braided to keep it out of her face. You look like a queen, Marta had said, tears in her eyes. Alara didn't feel like a queen. She felt like a girl with too much power and not enough knowledge, about to attempt something that should be impossible. But she climbed the tower stairs anyway, following the bond that pulled her toward Darren like a lodestone. He was waiting in the chamber where she'd first seen him, that circular room scarred with claw marks and stained with old blood. But the chains had been removed. No iron rings marred the floor. The space stood empty except for the king himself, standing at the window and watching the moon rise over the mountains. You came, he said, without turning. Did you think I wouldn't? I hoped you would. But I would have understood if you'd stayed away. He finally looked at her, and the amber in his eyes already had that inhuman glow. The transformation was beginning. I'm afraid, Alara. Afraid of what I might do if this doesn't work. She crossed to him, taking his hands in hers. They were already warming, muscles beginning to shift beneath skin. Then we'll chain you if we must. But I don't think it will come to that. Your faith in me is either beautiful or foolish. Can't it be both? That pulled a rough laugh from him. I love you. I should have said it before, but I'm saying it now. Whatever happens tonight, know that. The words pierced through her like arrows, sharp and sweet. I love you too. That's why this will work. The moon cleared the mountains, and Darren's control shattered. He doubled over with a sound of agony, bones beginning to crack and reshape. Alara felt his pain through the bond, white hot and consuming. She dropped to her knees beside him, pressing her palms against his chest, where the curse sat like a cancer. Let me in, she whispered. Don't fight it. Just let me in. Her moonblood power surged forward, following the connection between them into places the curse had twisted. She could see it now. Dark magic wound through his very essence, forcing the beast and the man into opposition instead of harmony. Every full moon, it tore them apart and left only rage behind. Alara began to unwind it. The curse fought back, sending waves of malevolent energy through the connection. She gasped as pain lanced through her own body. her silver scars burning as if freshly made. But she didn't let go, couldn't let go. She poured her healing magic into the knot of darkness, using the mate bond as a conduit. Dissolving the curse thread by thread, Darren's transformation continued, his body shifting between forms as the magic inside him warred with itself. He howled a sound filled with pain and confusion, but Alara held on, her hands pressed against fur and skin and something between. "You're not alone," she told him, her voice steady even as her own power burned through her veins. "I'm here. We're doing this together." The curse writhed, trying to maintain its hold. But Moonblood was older, purer, and Alara's determination was absolute. She felt the moment it began to unravel a crack in the darkness that spread like lightning through glass. The malevolent energy fragmented, losing cohesion. And with one final push of healing magic, it shattered entirely, the transformation completed. But this time, when the beast rose before her, its eyes were clear, amber and intelligent and absolutely, perfectly in control. Darren sat back on his haunches, his massive form still caught between wolf and man, but the rage was gone. The mindless violence had been replaced by focused awareness. He looked down at his clawed hands, then at Alara, and made a sound that might have been wonder. "It worked," she breathed. "You're free." The beast's response was to carefully, gently, pull her against his chest. His arms, huge and furred and tipped with claws that could tear through stone, cradled her as if she were made of glass. And Alara felt the bond between them stabilize, settling into a new pattern that felt right in ways the old one never had. She pressed her face against his fur, feeling his heartbeat strong and steady. "How do you feel?" The answer came not in words, but in sensation, relief so profound it brought tears to her eyes, gratitude that wrapped around her like a physical embrace, and love so fierce it made the bond glow bright between them. He couldn't speak in this form, but she understood him perfectly. They stayed like that as the moon tracked across the sky, two souls finally balanced and whole. When dawn came and Darren transformed back to human, he held her just as tightly, his face buried in her hair. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice rough. "Thank you for not giving up, for seeing what I could be instead of what the curse made me. I only saw what was already there." Alara pulled back enough to meet his gaze. "You were never the monster, Darren. The curse was. And now it's gone." His hands framed her face, thumbs brushing across her cheekbones. "Marry me. Not because of the bond or duty, but because I want to spend the rest of my life with you. Because you make me better. Because I love you more than I thought possible." "Yes." The answer came without hesitation. "Yes, of course yes." He kissed her then, deep and claiming and filled with promise. And Alara kissed him back, pouring every emotion she couldn't name into the gesture. The bond flared bright between them, sealing something that went beyond magic or tradition. They were choosing each other. And that made all the difference. Epilogue. Queen of Scars 3. Months later, Alara stood in the great hall wearing a gown of midnight blue embroidered with silver thread that matched the scars on her arms. She'd insisted on sleeves that ended at her elbows, leaving the marks visible. They were part of her story now, not something to hide, but something to honor. The hall was packed with Lycans from every territory. All of them gathered to witness the formal bonding ceremony between their king and his mate. Alara had spent weeks learning names, politics, and the complex web of alliances that held the northern territories together. She still felt like she was playing dress-up sometimes. But Darren never let her doubt her place beside him. Elder Morgana conducted the ceremony, binding their wrists with silver cord and speaking ancient words that made the air shimmer. When it was done, when Alara had been formally recognized as queen and mate, the hall erupted into howls of approval. Darren pulled her close, ignoring protocol, to kiss her in front of everyone. "My queen," he murmured against her lips. "My mate, my love, my king," she replied, smiling up at him. "My curse breaker, my impossible choice." They'd chosen each other, despite everything that said they shouldn't, class and species, and years of being told they were less than they were. And somehow, impossibly, it had worked. As the celebration continued around them, Alara caught sight of Sire watching from the edge of the crowd. The female alpha's expression was inscrutable, but she bowed her head in acknowledgement before disappearing into the press of bodies. It was a small gesture, but it felt significant. Acceptance, however grudging. "Dance with me," Darren said, leading her onto the floor, where other couples had already begun moving to the music. "I want everyone to see what I see when I look at you." "And what's that?" "Strength." courage, beauty that has nothing to do with perfection and everything to do with survival. His hand settled at her waist, and they began to move together, the bond humming contentedly between them. A woman who saved a king by refusing to believe he was beyond saving. Alara rested her head against his chest, listening to his heartbeat. She thought of the girl she'd been 3 months ago, nameless, scarred, convinced she was worthless. That girl seemed impossibly distant now, transformed by love and magic into someone who could stand beside a king without flinching. But she hadn't changed, not really. She'd simply been given the chance to become who she'd always been, beneath the scars and silence. Someone strong, someone worthy, someone loved. And when the next full moon rose and Darren transformed without chains or rage, simply running through the forest with Alar riding on his back through their bond connection, she knew with absolute certainty that they'd found what everyone searches for, not just a mate, but a home in each other's souls. The invisible girl had become a queen. The cursed king had found his salvation. And together, they would rewrite every story that said broken things couldn't heal. The end.